This is Glenn Enriquez, and I'm here with Henry Grady in this remarkable facility that Henry has here in Stewart. And it's filled with cars that Henry has, in one form or another, been responsible for rehabilitating, rebuilding, just acquiring, and preserving and becoming the caretaker for the car. And we'll talk more about the specific cars later in this video, but the story that I would like to tell with this video is a story of Henry Grady the man, as opposed to Henry Grady the car restorer. Because I've spoken to Henry at length, and he's got a fascinating story, and I think that there are things that we can all take from the story. Today, in a TikTok, Instagram culture that we live in, Henry is, Henry's like me, he's a dinosaur. So, but I think that the dinosaurs have really interesting stories to tell. And, they've grown up in a culture that had a different value system. So anyway, I think Henry's got a great story. I think you'll enjoy hearing the story. So we're going to get started with that right now. Henry, thanks for making the time to talk to us. As I said just a minute ago in the introduction, I think you've got a story that I think is inspirational, and I just wanted to explore that. So when I look around here and I see all these cars, and I see, they're not just cars, they're impeccably restored. And only someone who has an incredible passion for cars goes to this length to get that level of perfection. So I'm assuming that since your last name isn't Rockefeller, that you did it the old-fashioned way. You kept your head down, you studied, and you acquired all this. So what I'd like to do is go back to the beginning and talk about what started you on this journey. Can you remember a specific incident that put you on this road?
Well, not really a specific incident, although I can remember when I was still in high school. I had an interest in cars, although we didn't have cars. My mother was the driver of a 38 Ford Coupe through the war. That was her car. I learned to drive it a little bit. And the first car that I remember that was significant in my life was I think it was a 48 or 49 four-door Ford. And I talked her into letting me put a set of Elon headers on that car. Now, why she agreed to it, I don't know, but she did. And that was the first time I'd ever actually done any work on a car. And but I was just coming out of the university. I went to the University of North Carolina, and I went from 48 to 51 at the University of North Carolina, and then the Korean War was on, and I decided that I didn't want to sit in a foxhole in Korea, so I decided to try to go to flight school, military flight school, U.S. Air Force, and fortunately was accepted in flight training. And I bought, while I was still in the military, I bought a 49 Lincoln Cosmopolitan Coupe that I thought was a wonderful car. It was an old flathead V8, wonderful car. And that's the car I went off to the military with. I was at home for Christmas leave, and my best friend from college showed up driving this funny looking little car, and I said, "Come on, Pat, let me show you my Lincoln. We'll drive it around. You'll see how this car performs," and so on. And we did. And we got back to the house, and he said, "Well, would you like to drive my car?" And I said, "Well, you're here, I might as well try it." He had an MGTD, 52 MGTD. And a week later, I sold the Lincoln and bought a brand new 53 MGTD.
Wow.
It's like the light came on. I said, this is the way a car should be. Not like the big car, the little maneuverable, fun to drive car. That was it. So that started the journey.
Okay. So that particular car introduced you to British cars. Were you interested in them mechanically, or just aesthetically, or?
It was just an overall feeling. The cars to me have a soul, and it was just a feeling that the car had. I enjoyed it. It was fun to drive. It was easy to drive. It was maneuverable, and that sort of was the real start of the journey.
Okay.
It was an interesting way to start it.
Okay. So you're in the military at that point, and you have this MG. Were you stateside, or?
I was stateside originally. I was at Lackland Air Force Base for a while, and then at Hondo Air Force Base, which is about 25 miles west of Lackland, for flight training. And then I went to Reese Air Force Base in Lubbock, Texas, for advanced training in multi-engine. And then I was told to go to Japan. So originally for combat crew training, I went to Grady, South Carolina for initial flight training in the aircraft. I was assigned to fly C-119 flying boxcars, and which is what I wanted because of my physical size, I would have gone to jets. And I didn't really like heavy Gs. I just was not comfortable with them. I wanted to fly multi-engine. And so my instructor said, well, the only way you're going to qualify is to be very good at flying instruments. So I said, okay, you're on. And so fortunately I qualified for multi-engine. But then after Reese and Greenville for about, I think it was in Greenville for about a month, I was then sent to Japan. Of course, I sold the MG at that point, went to Japan. And I was there for 2 years, flying into Japan. And of course, the Korean War was over in June of '53. I got there in April of '53. About 1936, 35 or 36, back when I was born in 1929. In 35 or 36, my father, who was an attorney in Clinton, North Carolina, a barnstormer came through with an aircraft, actually a Waco biplane. And these guys would come around the country and introduce themselves. And they would find a field someplace near the town and land and try to drum up business. My father went and flew with them and basically bought the Waco from that guy with no flying experience at all. And the guy rode with him for about an hour and he took the airplane. it was from there. So probably I would fly with him maybe, I probably flew with him a dozen times, I suppose, in the Waco. Now, strangely enough, we had a gentleman who worked for us named was Fulton, who was a little darker complexion. And my mother would not let me go in the airplane unless Fulton was sitting with me in the front seat. And of course, my father taught himself how to fly the airplane, would take us up and fly. And Fulton would be whiter than I was when we came down.
Well, how does one teach themselves to fly?
You just do it. You just do it. I mean, these were simple. You just get in it, you know where the throttle is, and you know where the controls are, and you do it.
Well, I understand, okay, but there's all kinds of things like stalls and
you don't do that very much. This is years ago. Different world that we're in today. Totally different world. So that was my first exposure to aircraft. Now, that didn't really stick with me, because I wasn't really an aircraft fan beyond that. Then it went on through the situation, as I'm saying, the time in the university and my decision to go to the Air Force rather than sitting in a foxhole in Korea. So basically, it got me through into the military flight training and graduation in my wings. And then, of course, I ended up going to Japan. Now, strange thing happened in Japan. In late '53, the French in Indochina were running out of pilots. They needed aircraft and they needed pilots. So they came to the U.S. military and said, can you give us support in Indochina? And because basically Ho Chi Minh, who basically was the rebel in Vietnam, was just starting and so forth. Well, the U.S. Air Force agreed to lend them airplanes and lend them pilots. And so we would leave twice. I did this. We left the first time in the fall of '53, flew down to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, put French markings on the airplanes, left all of our ID uniforms in Clark Air Force Base, and our uniform consisted of a white t-shirt, a pith helmet, khaki pants, and combat boots. That's what we had. This is in warm country in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And then we'd go across the South China Sea to Vietnam. And I spent 6 weeks in Haiphong, which is up in North Vietnam. And then later went back and spent 6 weeks in what we call terrain, which is now known as Da Nang in Vietnam.
I've visited Da Nang.
You've been to Da Nang. I've seen pictures of it on television now. It didn't look anything like that in 1954.
Did you ever get into Cam Bay?
No.
Okay.
No.
I mean, that turned into a major hub.
Oh,
for the
yeah.
military.
But it was a great experience. Flying for the French.
So you were flying.
C-119.
Yeah, but you were flying cargo in or personnel in?
Basically, both personnel and cargo, moving whatever the French needed, move. And so we go to a number of different bases in Vietnam.
Okay, so now you're in Japan.
Right.
You're flying. What are you doing for transportation in Japan?
I had a Vespa scooter that I bought in Vietnam. I bought it when I went to Haiphong. I bought the Vespa scooter, and that was my transportation.
Okay.
And I was there for 2 years overall, counting 2 years in the military there. And when I got ready to come back to the United States after 2 years, there was a program that offered to military personnel that you could buy a car in Europe and have it shipped to wherever you wanted. So I decided to buy either an Austin Healey BN-104 or a Triumph TR2. For some reason, I chose the Triumph. So I ordered a Triumph TR2, which was shipped to Japan, shipped to actually Yokohama. And I went and got it. And as far as I know, it was the first sports car to be imported into the Japanese islands after the war. The Japs went nuts over this car. They just couldn't believe that a car could look like this. But I drove it, and I had a very good friend who was stationed just outside of Tokyo. So I left the car there with him, and it was there for a couple of months. And I would go up on the weekends and drive it around Tokyo. Then I wanted to come back by boat, but he said, no, you can fly back. So I put the car on the ship to come back to the United States. And strangely enough, the day that I arrived in San Francisco, the car arrived. The boat was, the car left a little bit before I did on the boat, and then I flew back in. Then I picked it up, and a strange situation happened to me. When I was in Japan, I love milk. And the only milk available to us was powdered milk, which was then reconstituted. And I tasted it initially, and it was horrible. I got used to it. So when I came back to San Francisco, the first thing I wanted to do was get a big glass of cold milk. So I went into a restaurant and I ordered a large glass of cold milk, and it came out and it tasted horrible. My taste buds had adapted themselves to the milk in the Far East. But I got used to it later. At any rate, I picked up the triumph in San Francisco and drove it all the way to eastern North Carolina, all the way across the country. Interesting trip, but I made it. So that was of course the beginning. And then I was stationed in the United States at Oklahoma City, Tinker Air Force Base at Oklahoma City. And my two best friends were F-84F pilots. They were beside the SAC at Tinker. One of them had a Porsche, and one of them had an Austin Hill. And I had the Triumph. I traded the Triumph for a Jaguar XK120 Coupe with a dealer in Oklahoma City named Thoroughbred Car Company, C.S. Trosper. But the three of us just we had a house together. We had the three sports cars. We were young pilots. We had a great time.
I guess.
So basically, I was there for a year, and then our terms were all up in the military because we were on the contract back then. And Archie was from New York City, and Lou, my other friend, was from New Jersey. I'm from North Carolina. So we said, what are we going to do, guys? We're three bachelors. I said, well, we got to live where it's warm. So let's either go to San Diego or go to Florida. And we decided not to go to San Diego because we figured on the West Coast we'd never see our families again on the East Coast. It's too far away. This is in 1955, basically, that we did this. And so we decided on Florida. So what are we going to do in Florida? Well, let's open a sports car dealership. So we searched the state and we found that Clearwater, Florida was the largest town in Florida that did not have a foreign car dealership. So we petitioned with a company called Waco Motors in Miami and a company called Ship and Shore Motors in West Palm Beach to have the cars that they imported, because they were the importers.
So they're distributors.
They were the importer and distributor, right? And through Waco Motors, we had Jaguar, we had Mercedes, we had Hillman, we had MGs, and a variety of other things. And through Ship and Shore Motors, we had Austin and Austin Healey's. They were separated for some reason back then. And so we opened a car dealership in Clearwater, Florida called the Test Sports Cars.
So you had, multiple brands to sell.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, we were exposed to all these things. And it was like, when we got to Clearwater, the three of us, three bachelors with sports cars, and we said, well, where are we going to live here? So we went over to Clearwater Beach, and we found that in the marina, upstairs over the marina office was a 3-bedroom apartment for rent. So we rented that 3-bedroom apartment upstairs at the Clearwater Marina. And this is in 56 actually now. And we had a wonderful time.
So, yeah, I bet you did. So tell me about Volvo approaching.
Well, the first year we were there, a gentleman walked into the store and he said, I'm representing a car called a Volvo. I said, what? He said, a Volvo. It's made in Sweden. And we're trying to develop some dealerships in the United States. And we want to get the car well known. This car was called a 444. It was a 3-speed, looked like a 41 Ford. The shape of it and so forth. So we agreed to take it on to the dealership. And so he said, well, how do I get this car well known? Now, we had started racing then. We'd started racing in 56, the three of us. I think my first race car was a Morris Minor sedan. Sedan racing was very popular back then. And I said, we can race this Volvo and it'll get it well known. So he said, okay, I'll give you a 444 to race. So he did. And I raced that car for over a year, and it was an unusual little car, 1,500 cc's, two-door sedan, had no tachometer, 3-speed, not 4-speed. So I won a lot of races with it in SCCA in 1956. And the only way that I could drive it was I would rev it until the valves bounced, and then I would shift it. Now, I really tried to break that car. I really tried to do it. I could not. It was indestructible. It was a wonderful little car.
So back in those days, Henry, I mean, you know, Florida was kind of an outpost. I mean, was there a lot of population to
We
sell
had a
to?
lot of SCCA racing in Florida. Florida was unique. We had probably a dozen beautiful little airports scattered around Florida that the military put in during World War II. Now, they decommissioned the majority of them. So what they did with them, they just gave them to the towns. So we would simply go to Vero Beach, or we would go to Sebastian, or we'd go to Venice, or we'd go wherever we'd go around Florida that had a beautiful little airport that had maybe 5 or 6 airplanes on it. That was it. We'd say, we want to hold a sports car race here. Oh, okay. So we'd come up and lay out a course using the taxiways and the runways and put hay bales around to show where the course went. And we would race. And we had a lot of SCCA racing in Florida, a lot.
That was some man-style racing.
Oh, it was great. It was terrific. And of course, it's totally different than racing today. Because I'd go to the races and I would have 5 or 6 people there helping me. Now today, if you have 5 or 6 people helping you, you pay them, you house them, you feed them, everything. Back then, no. Everybody did it because it was simply the fun, the love of the whole situation. And it was all gratis. So basically, entry fees were like $20, $25 for into your car. And we'd go out and race them. And no roll bars. You really didn't have to wear helmets. You didn't really have to wear seat belts. But we gradually added all that in 56 and 57. That was all I had. But it was a different world, a whole different world.
Had to be a fun time.
It was fun. Yeah. And we only did it because we loved it. And the people that would come and help us, and pit crew and so on, they did it just because they loved it.
Mm-hmm. So, besides campaigning the Volvo, were you racing any of the Heelys or anything like that?
Yeah, I raced a bunch of other cars. I had a Healy Silverstone for a while. Then I bought a Lotus 11 that I raced for quite a while. And then I teamed up with a man named Gene Beach in Clearwater. Gene's an architect, was an architect. And he had built a Crosley Special that he had raced. And he and I decided that we could build something a lot better. So we went to work and we built a little car. We decided the way to do it was to start, first of all, the car that was top of the heap. And SCCA is divided into production cars and so-called specials, which are the race cars. And we decided we wanted to build a special. And we went over to Tom Wolf Fiat in Tampa. And we bought a Fiat 600. Now, bear in mind that the top car in the class that we wanted to run in, which was called H Modified, 750 cc's or less, was a thing called a Stangaline, which was a tack. And so we decided we had to build something that would beat Penn in this Stangaline. And so we bought a Fiat 600, drove it back to Clearwater. We got several old mattresses and put in Gene's garage. And we stripped the car. All we wanted from the car was the suspension components, the engine, and the gearbox, and the steering. That's it. We didn't want the body at all. So what we did was we took the Fiat 600 car and we put it over on these mattresses that we put in the garage. And we built a jig that fastened to the bottom of the car out of conduit. We built the jig. that had a little steel plate every place that something bolted onto the chassis. And then we took that jig off and we built a space frame around that jig so that everything on it was the same dimension as the Fiat 600. Rear engine, not mid engine, but rear engine. And we hand hammered out an aluminum body for it. Gas welded it together. And strangely enough, we sold the body back to the dealer. Now, here's the funny part. We financed the car. And for years, I would see the banker, who was a friend of mine, and he would say, how you like that little car? Oh, it's doing great. It's doing great. But, of course, the only thing we kept was the engine, gearbox, steering, and brakes.
Now, the three of you were still partners together. Yes?
We had opened the dealership in Miami, right, or in Clearwater, and we were partners. Right.
So, at some point, you moved on from there.
Yes.
When did that happen?
Well, in 59, in early 59, we decided that we should open a parts distribution because we had a lot of people in Florida. Cars were just kind of coming into their being in this. And there was a company in New York called Beck Distributing Corporation. There were two. Actually, Columbia Motors and Beck Distributing were the two major distributors of foreign car parts on the East Coast. There was another one in California that was Dacian. But we made a deal with Beck to become their first distributor, local distributor, rather than, because they were the importers from all these parts. So we made a deal with Beck to become their first distributor, and we opened up a little distributorship called Vitesse Imported Parts. And we talked our landlord where we had the dealership in Miami, in Clearwater, into building another building behind it that we could put the parts in, which he did. So we opened up that, and then I had an opportunity in 59, a much better opportunity to move to Miami and open up a bigger dealership, or distributorship for parts in Miami. And so I made a deal with my two partners that I split. I went to Miami and getting ready to get out of the Air Force. We decided we wanted to go sail. Now, I had sailed as a kid on 4 or 5 different sailboats and had sailing experience. Neither of them had any sailing experience at all. But we decided to buy a sailboat, about a 38, 39 footer. And we went through Yachting Magazine and we found for sale, it was on Staten Island, a 39-foot yawl, old wooden yawl. Everything was wooden back then with a few exceptions. And we made a deal with both of them. And so Archie and I, who's the New Yorker, went to Staten Island over Thanksgiving leave. And we bought the boat, and we decided, we paid for it, we decided to take it south, because we wanted to get it out of the cold weather. This is in Thanksgiving. So he and I were in New York City, and that was a whole different, I can tell you about that too, the trip. When we were in the military, we could travel on what are known as hops. You could just go to an Air Force base or military base and find an airplane that was going someplace, and you get a seat on it, and you go. So we were trying to get to New York City. We were at Tinker Air Force Base, and we couldn't find anybody who wanted to go.
So were you still in the reserves, or were you still active?
We were in the Air Force.
You're still active, okay.
So we finally found a guy with a C-47 that was going to go to Wright-Patton Air Force Base in Ohio. And the only problem was that he didn't have enough extra parachutes. In the military, you need to have a parachute if you're going to be on the military aircraft. So I said, no problem. I'll go check out 2 parachutes from my operation, which is right down the hall at Tinker. And I did, 2 backpacks. So I took the 2 backpacks, and we got on this C-47, and we went to Wright-Patton in Ohio. And we were trying to get another hop out of there, going to I forgot the Air Force Base we were going to on Long Island. But I forgot the name of it. It's closed now. At any rate, we couldn't find a hop. So we said, oh, we got to go commercial. So we went over to the commercial, and well, we got these. First of all, we got all this Arctic gear that we took because we knew it was going to be cold. We had fleece lined jackets and all that sort of thing. And I had these 2 backpacks. So we got on this commercial airliner with these 2 parachutes to fly. I think we went to Idlewild. But we got a lot of work, so So we got to New York City, and we were trying to say, oh, we need charts. Well, we couldn't find any charts. This was in the middle of the night. We finally found a pawn shop that would sell us a compass because we didn't know what we had on the boat. We'd never seen the boat. And so we bought the compass, and we bought a Texaco road map.
Oh, God.
Which showed the east coast of the United States, and it showed every place there was a Texaco dealer. Now, we figured, what the hell? We'll just get off, half mile offshore and go south. So we left Staten Island early in one morning, and we had, of course, our parachutes on board on the boat, and we had all of our Arctic gear on the boat to keep warm. And we went out, and you have to go around Sandy Hook, which is at the north end of there. Went around Sandy Hook, and the first stop we made was Atlantic City. We went into Atlantic City so we could get something to eat and fuel up. So we did, and then we headed south, and we went across, at night we went across Delaware Bay, and as we were going south along the coast of Maryland, we could hear off in the distance a boom, 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 and we're about maybe 3/4 of a mile offshore sailing south, and this military crash boat showed up, and they said, "Ahoy! You're in a gunnery range."
Oh, God.
And we said, "Oh, okay, we didn't know because we didn't have any charts. We just had this Texaco road map." So they started giving us a tow. Now the problem was that the crash boat in idle was probably doing about 12 or 13 knots. The sailboat has a hull speed of around 9 knots. So they would tow us until they were about to bury the bow of the boat, and then they would take it out of gear. And this went on for about 2 hours, and they towed us out of the gunnery range.
So let me make sure I understand this, okay?
Yeah.
So you bought this boat in New York.
Yeah.
Only one person has any sailing experience. Right. And I suspect that it was limited blue water sailing experience.
Yes.
And you point the bow south.
Right.
With a Texaco map.
Yeah.
And away you go.
That's it.
Okay.
That's exactly what happened. So we finally we're down, and we're looking at our calendar. We had to get back to Oklahoma City. Our leave was going to run out. And so we got to Ocean City, Maryland. And we didn't know how to get in the end of it because we had no charts for it. So there was a guy fishing outside, and we pulled up and said, "Can you tell us how to get through the inlet?" He said, "Well, I'm going in, just follow me." So we followed him through the inlet, and there's a Coast Guard station right inside. And we went up to the Coast Guard station and tied up, and we said, "We have to get back to Oklahoma City. Is there any place we can find to leave the boat here while we'll come back and get it in the spring?" And they said, "Yeah, there's a guy right up the canal here, go up there." And so we made a deal and left it there. Now we took from Ocean City, we took the bus to Washington, D.C. We then found a hop from D.C. to Love Field in Dallas, Texas. We then couldn't get anything out of Dallas to go back to Oklahoma City, so we got on the train and went to Norman, Oklahoma. Now here again, all this stuff, this gear and the parachutes and so on, all this stuff. Then we got a bus from Norman back to Oklahoma City. So it was quite a trip all the way around. So that was in there. So
it was creative, that's for sure. So curious. We'll get back to the Miami connection in a minute, but I'm kind of curious that when you separated, that you did choose aviation as a career.
I was offered, I could have gone regular, but I didn't want to. They offered me regular, which would have been, not just contract.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an offer from Fairchild Aviation to go to work for them in Hagerstown, Maryland, because the 119 is a Fairchild aircraft. And I had an offer to do that, and I said, no, I just want to go live in Florida where it's warm.
Okay.
And that's what we did.
Okay.
Just,
Okay.
I didn't do airline because I just said, I don't want to live out of a suitcase anymore. I've done that for a number of years. I don't want to do it.
Well, but you see, it was interesting because that would have been the easy choice, quite
Yes.
frankly.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, I could have gone to the airlines. Could have gone to the Fairchild at Hagerstown or to the airlines. Either one wouldn't have made any difference, but I didn't want to do it.
okay, so let's go back to Clearwater and the parts distributorship business,
Right.
and the folks in Miami. So what happened there?
I moved to Miami and I opened up a company in Miami called Import Motor Parts. And again, it was with a distributorship because that's where my contact was to get parts. But then I found that there were a number of other distributors in the United States, and I could buy from Columbia, I could buy from Geon, I could buy from all sorts of different people. So I would use the Beck numbering system, which was really the best in the industry for identifying parts. But I started buying elsewhere. Now, in the meantime, I'm in Japan, or in Miami, and a man came in who was a Cuban, a man named George Feldenkrais. And he and his partner had opened up a company called Carfel in Miami. They were importing parts from Japan. So I started buying clutches from them, from Japan, for everything, because the Japs were making clutch gears, and they were just starting their automotive industry, the Japanese were. And so I bought a lot of clutches from Carfel. Got to know George real well. I then hooked up George with McArney Corporation in New York. I called Bill Arnowitz and said, I want you to meet George Feldenkrais, maybe use some of his clutches. And so he developed a relationship with me, and I continued with Carfel. So it was a transition. Now, we opened up on 34th Street, 2717 Northwest 34th Street in Miami. I was there for about, I'd say, probably 2 to 3 years. And then I decided I wanted to move south down into Coral Gables. So I found a location in Coral Gables and moved the parts distributorship down to Coral Gables.
How many square feet were you in there?
We probably had, in the location on 34th Street, we probably had about, I'm going to estimate, I would say probably 6,000 feet in that. What a big building. Basically, I moved to Coral Gables. I found a lovely building in Coral Gables and opened up there.
So now, were you doing mostly wholesale business or retail business?
All three. I was doing selling to dealers, and I was selling to individuals. Now, at that time, bear in mind that this is in the early 60s, we did not break the pricing situation. That is, if you were a retail customer, you paid retail. If you were a dealer, you paid dealer. And there was no blending of the two prices. And we were able to do that for many years until a few people came along and started saying, no, we're going to sell at wholesale prices to everybody. And we were not happy about that, but hey, that's the way the world works.
So what year are we in now?
Okay, I did that from, I opened that up in 59 in the 34th Street location. Then moved to Coral Gables in about 60, I'd say about 62 or 63, and stayed there until basically until 70, I'm going to say it was 72 or 73, Beck Garnley made it. They were trying to open up distributorships all over the United States. So they made a deal for me to buy our company in Coral Gables. This is in Coral Gables. And then I sold them the company, and then I moved out to just near the Miami International Airport and found a huge building. It was, oh good Lord, it was probably, I'm going to say it was 60, 70,000 square feet.
Wow.
And then I went to work for Beck Garnley, and I was the president of Southeastern Beck Garnley, running that, serving the Southeastern U.S. with parts distributorship. And I was with them for, I would say 3 years. And I really didn't like dealing with corporate. It was a situation that I could call up Bill Arwitz, and Bill and I would, and his second in command was a guy named Tony Morello, and we would come to situations on the telephone, this, and then the next thing I know, somebody would say, oh, send me a memo on all that. I'd say, I'm not sending you that damn memo, we've talked about it all, we got it all worked out. So basically I decided that this was not what I wanted. So I retired. I had a friend in Miami named Brian O'Neill. Now his father's name was Bill O'Neill. Bill O'Neill was the son of the founder of General Tire and Rubber. And they had a house on Miami Beach. And Brian was a racer, and we became very good friends. Brian was about, I'd say, 6 or 7 years younger than I am. And so we decided that we wanted to try to get a Honda motorcycle dealership, which we did. So I owned about 33% of the Honda motorcycle dealership in Miami, starting in the mid-60s. This is probably 64, 65. So basically I started, that wasn't the Honda dealership, I'm getting the figure here. 64, 65. And up until 67, basically, Honda's biggest bike was a thing called a Honda Dream, which was a 305cc. And so we opened up a showroom just a couple of blocks from where Import Motor Parts was, in Coral Gables. And, but I was racing. I was racing a variety of different things. And Gene and I had built several cars. And then I started building cars on my own in '63. I built a car for Brian O'Neill. That's how, one of the reasons we became really good friends. I built an Alpha-powered car, which, quite frankly, I brought back. It's in the back room. So, basically.
So you built a car for?
Okay, I built a car for Brian O'Neill. And then in '67, Ray Mowery and and Ray was a doctor of mine, a good friend of mine, and we've been buddies racing. We decided to build a car together, and it didn't have a name. It was going to be a class, by then H modified and morphed into what's known as D Sports Racing in SCCA, which was 850 cc's. We were going to build a car to fit into that class. So I designed a car that was a monocoque car, all aluminum with some steel reinforcing. But the body is basically aluminum glued together with, used an EC638 3M epoxy to put it all together. And we glued it all together, and the car weighed about a little less than 800 pounds.
Oh my.
And there's a model of it over in the cabinet over there that a friend of mine made for me some years ago. And it was powered initially by 2 Honda 305 motors that I coupled together. I took one engine and pressed the crankshaft apart so that the output would come together in the center of the two engines. Put a primary drive off that onto a BSA gearbox, which I mounted behind it, and then onto a differential situation that I manufactured with all chain drive, and was manufactured from an Austin Healey Sprite rear end. We built that car, and we raced it for probably a year and a half, and it was a real winner. It really went. Sold it to a man named Harry Stevenson, who continued to race it and continued to really enjoy it. And then he ran it. Back then, the runoffs for SCCA were in Atlanta, rode Atlanta. And Harry won national championship in that car in both 71 and 72.
No
He
kidding.
was national champion.
Yeah.
I have pictures of it in the office, but I have a model of it over in the cabinet. But I can't find the car. It's just disappeared. I'd buy it back in a minute if I could find it.
Well, you think it was just parted out or
I
something?
have no idea. I can't find it. I know it went to a man also a man in North Florida, and then it went to Houston, Texas. And I found somebody that I called a guy. I called the SCCA headquarters and said, "Tell me who the regional exec is in Texas at that time." So I called him up and I said, "Can you tell me some of the guys that you know?" And I described the car, and he said, I called one of the guys. He said, "Yeah, I saw that car one time out at Rattlesnake Raceway in West Texas." But he said, "I never saw it again."
Yeah.
So I have no idea what happened to it. Ocean City, Maryland. That's where we left it. So Lou and I went back on in January of, this is 56, January 56, to get in the boat and sail it south. My father lived down on the Neuse River in Newbern, North Carolina. And I was going to go down into the Chesapeake, then go through the Dismal Canal and pick up, and then through Albemarle Sound and so on, and go up the Neuse River and take it to his house. So we left, Lou and I left Ocean City and headed south. Well, about before we got to the Chesapeake, a northeaster came through. And it was blowing like mad. I mean, what? Now we're sailing overnight. We're trying to get into the Chesapeake, and I finally found a sea buoy that I thought was the entrance to the Chesapeake. Well, it wasn't. It was a sea buoy that was almost. There's a place called Cobb Island, Virginia. There's a Coast Guard station in Cobb Island, Virginia, which is an island off the coast of Virginia. And we found that, no, we're not going to get through. Plus the fact that I had a leaking horn timber and a variety of things going on in the boat. So I decided to get in. There's a bank that's off a bar off the Coast Guard station. And I decided we would get in behind that bar and drop the hook and just ride out the storm. Well, because of the sea conditions, we misjudged where the bar was. And we went onto that bar. Now this is it. This is in February at about 4:30 in the afternoon. It's damn near dark and so on. The sea conditions are horrible. And we went up on that bar. Now I'll remember to this day, the first, when we hit that bar, that boom. And then the next sea, boom, boom, and so on. Well, fortunately, there was a guy on watch at the Coast Guard station, which was right there. We had about maybe 3/4 to half a mile off the beach, and he spotted us. So the next thing I knew, the picket boat came out. You know what a picket boat is?
Mm-hmm.
High side picket is. Well, he couldn't come up on the bar, so the picket boat could lay downstream from us, downwind from us. So Lou put a couple extra life vests on and went overboard to go to the picket boat. Because, well, the boat's over on our side like this now on the farm.
Yeah.
Now, I'm up by the main mast, and my brother's aboard. Lou and my brother, the three of us aboard. And so, long story short, they had a hard time getting Lou out of the water. They finally he got a foot up, and they dragged him out of the water and so on. And he was damn near frozen from being in the water. The next thing I knew, the commander of the station was coming out with a double ender, copper sheet double ender that they had. And he was able to bring it right up to the transom of the sailboat. My brother was able to get aboard right away. Now they're yelling at me, come on, come on, come on, come on. And the boat's over on our side. So I'm forward and I'm running down the cabin side with rigging everywhere and this going on and so on. And I got to the transom and the picket boat, there was a sea came along and took the picket boat up, not the picket boat, but the double ender back. And I said, it's now or never. I jumped and I grabbed the handrail on the double ender with one hand. I said, I am not letting go of this boat. Long story short, they got us ashore. Lou was damn near frozen. My brother and I held him up in a warm shower for about a half an hour to thaw him out. And so the next morning, they took us with a boat across to the mainland. We went over to the beach. The biggest part of the boat we found was a piece maybe 6 or 7 feet square. The boat was scattered all over the beach, just completely destroyed. And so they took us over to pick up a bus. This is before the bridge over the Chesapeake. You had to take a ferry across. They took us down to the Cape. We took a ferry across. Now I called my mother and I said, "You could have her pick us up in Norfolk. We had a little trouble with the boat." So she drove up from Wilson, North Carolina, which is where she was. And she was very gregarious, and she talked to the people, and she said, my sons are on a sailboat that had a little trouble over Carl Island, and they're coming across to pick them up here. And the ticket agent said, "You're the mother of those boys?" And she pulled out the Norfolk paper, and the Norfolk paper said, "3 snatched from the jaws of death."
Wow.
So that was it. Well, we got the check from the insurance company within 10 days for the boat, $5,000. So that was part of
And did that turn into a Honda dealership?
that turned into the car dealership.
Oh, okay.
And, so it's funny how it all folds in. So,
Oh, well, it is.
so at any rate, skip ahead. Basically, I had import motor parts and the Honda dealership. Now, help me with the time here.
Then you had separate tires also in a different location in Carl Gables.
Oh, I had actually, I had 6 different stores in Florida. At Tampa, St. Petersburg, West Palm Beach, North Miami, and had the one in Carl Gables. That's when I merged all that into Beck Army. Sold to Beck Army, the whole thing.
So tell us about the racing, because you started racing when you were in Clearwater and you had the dealership.
Yeah.
Now, and then you started, pulling motors out of this and that to make race cars. But at some point did you campaign Jaguars for a while?
No, in actuality, I got more interested in building cars than actually driving.
Okay.
When I built the car for Brian O'Neill, it was the construction of the car that was very important to me. But before that, Baker number 2, which we had built for Sebring. Now, what happened, actually I didn't talk about this, in 1960, in August of 1960, a man named John Bentley, who was a British author, he did sports car magazines and all that sort of thing. And he had won the Index of Performance at Sebring in the early 50s. Now, he was good friends with a man named Bill Ward, who was a very close friend of mine, who actually ran the art department for the University of Miami for a number of years. And Bill was a racer too. We raced together. And so John Bentley said to him, "You think Gene and Henry will build me a car for Sebring for 1960? 61 it was. And this is in end of August in 19, no, this is end of August 1959. For 1960, he wanted it, which is in March. So Gene and I said, of course we'll build your car. with basically about 5 months to go, we said we'll do it. Now, bear in mind, I'm based in Miami, and so Gene and I started construction of the car, and I was doing engine construction and so on. And that's when we decided to use the Saab motor rather than the Fiat motor. And because the Saab 750 was the most powerful 750 engine that we used. So we talked Saab into giving us a motor, which they did. The Saab factory gave us a motor for it. And I would run my business all through the week. And at 3 o'clock Friday afternoon, I'd get my car and drive to Clearwater. And it would take about, at the time I could make it in about 3.5 hours. I was speeding a little bit. And I would work straight through, a nap here, a nap there, and so on. And Gene's wife, Jill, would feed us on the way. Sunday night at about 9 o'clock, I'd get in the car and drive back to Miami. That went on for 5 months, building the car. And we finally got the car finished. And it started Sebring, it ran 5 hours until the engine blew up.
Oh, okay.
So, but then I took that car back to Miami and I put a variety of engines in it. I put a 750, Agar 750 twin cam in it, and we ran it for a while. Then I decided to use a Ford Kent motor, which back then was a 3-main bearing motor. And the original Ford, the 105E is what that car was called. And bear in mind that it had, the crankshaft was cast iron and hollow crankshaft. 3-main bearing, not a 5-main bearing. So I got one of them and built the engine up and, so on. And started racing it. And the engine would blow up. So I went over, there was a company in Miami called Peugeot Motors. It was the English Ford dealer. Now what happened was that on that motor, 3-main bearing with the thrust bearing, on the center main bearing, is only half the thrust bearing, a thrust washer. And it would, after a period of time with women driving around leaving the foot on the clutch, pushing the crankshaft forward, it would wear out the back half of the thrust bearing, and it would cause it to spin and it would wipe out the center main cap in the engine. So Ford would warranty the whole engine. They would warranty the whole block because they didn't know how to make a center main bearing cap. We did. I bought 5 blocks from the dealer, 5 of them that had been warranted, and I made steel center main bearing caps for them. Not cast iron, which the other ones were cast iron. And I went through all 5 blocks, blowing them up. This was in the development of the engine. First we throw rods, and I did what's known as boxing the rods. I put extra reinforcement on the rods. Then I had situations that revving them like we did. The rocker arms were on the rocker shaft with a single aluminum stand, and it would literally lift them up and bend the bolt. The bolt was tight, so I had to make a double bearing deal, double bolt deal, so that was all modified. So we didn't have enough lubrication and cooling, so I stacked a second oil pump on top of the original oil pump that only ran through the cooler. It was not through the whole thing. So it was a development program over about a 3-year period of blowing up engines and modifying them and so forth. Because we went to Nassau with the car, and Team Rosebud was there. And Team Rosebud was running the Ford engine, and they were turning 8,000 RPM. I said, if they can turn 8,000, I can turn 2,000. Well, 8,000 was not a happy time for the thing. I found out later that Team Rosebud had special engines from Ford with 5 main bearings. So that was, we were trying to do it all with a 3 main bearing cast iron crankshaft.
Wow.
So it was, I could write a book about the development of all this whole thing.
So you began racing when you were in Clearwater and had your auto dealership.
I went to Clearwater basically in May of 1956, and that's when we opened the dealership. April or May, I've forgotten exactly which month. And concurrently with opening the car dealership in Clearwater, we were all driving sports cars, my 2 partners and I, and we decided we were interested in SCCA racing. So we started, the first car that we raced was a little Mars-Minor sedan. Then it kind of went from there with the Healy Silverstone and then Lotus 11, and then my involvement with Gene Beach in building the Begras and racing those, and it was just a progression. And of course the Volvo came on the scene I think in late '56, and raced it for about a year, and various cars. And of course back then in '56, for the racing, it was very laid back. It was all amateur. In many of the cars, people would drive them to the race course, take the bumpers off, race them, throw the bumpers in the trunk and drive them back home, that sort of thing.
A little tape over the headlights. Huh?
Yeah, just about. It was a laid-back situation. But then, as I said, I bought the Lotus 11 and raced it for about a year and a half. Sold it to a man named Bill Story. Bill was a big guy and he could hardly get in the car, but it worked out. But that progressed. And then, of course, I went to Miami in 1959 and continued to race the Begras. I have several pictures of me racing the Begra 2. Now, bear in mind that Gene and I built a Begra for Sebring 61 for John Bentley, who was a British writer. And the 3 of us ran it at Sebring in 61. It was a quick little car, but then it went through various engines after the engine failure of the Saab engine at Sebring. And it went through a Fiat, actually an Abarth, twin cab Abarth, was in the car for a while on loan. I didn't own the engine, somebody loaned it to me. And then I put the Ford engine in it and went through the development phase of that. And then my friend Brian O'Neill asked me if I would build him a car, and which I did. And that was an Alfa-powered car. It started with an Alfa Giulietta engine, which is 1,290 cc's. And I had to reduce the displacement to 1,100 cc's, which was the maximum for that class of car. And so I had to make a new crankshaft. I bored it a little bit and made a new crankshaft, had new pistons to change the compression height and so on. But we machined out a crankshaft for the car.
Wow.
With a friend of mine who had a really sophisticated machine shop, but made it from scratch. So it was the only 1,100 cc Alfa that I know that existed. And Brian raced it for about a year and a half. Then he sold it to a friend, a man who later became my friend, and then went on from there. And I raced that car for several years, and then I stopped for a few years until Ray Mummery and I, Dr. Ray Mummery in Miami, who basically we ran several cars together, decided to build a car ourselves from scratch. And we wanted to build it in what was then called D Sports Racing, which used to be called H Modified, in that displacement of SCCA racing. And the car was revolutionary. It was a monocoque, all aluminum, glued together with epoxy, and it ended up with 2 Honda 305 motors in it. Was a really interesting little car, very very fast. But then in late '68, Honda came out with the Honda 750, and of course I had the interest in the Honda dealership in Miami, so I was able to take that motor and put it in the race car.
So let me ask, if I could, not being mechanically astute, why would you go from an automotive design engine to a bike engine? Just because it revs higher, or?
Well, there wasn't an automotive engine that I thought was suitable for the lightweight car that we wanted to build. And since I had the connection with the Honda dealership, Honda was pretty much king of the hill at that particular moment in motorcycles. And so it was a natural move for me to go to Honda.
And what did Honda think about the project?
They didn't have many comments about it. I mean, I'm a dealer. I can do what I want to with the stuff that I've got. Okay. And Honda themselves made no comments about it.
Okay. So you continued to race for a number of years, and I know that you campaigned in Europe. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, that was later. Bear in mind that I stopped racing actually in about 73 or 74. I basically stopped. I said, I've done this enough. I've devoted a large percentage of the time in my life to racing, and I don't need to do this anymore. And I quit. And I've just concentrated on business. I stayed with Beck Arnley until about 70, I've forgotten exactly, about 74. And then I retired. And I had a nice little airplane at the time. I had a beautiful sailboat. And I wasn't really into cars at that particular moment as far as sports cars were concerned. I had sold the last Honda 750 to Harry Stevenson, and of course, as I mentioned, he won national championship in 71 and 72 with that car, because it was very interesting. Very streamlined, very low drag, very lightweight, and a fair amount of power. So it was wonderful. At any rate, I stopped racing, and I didn't start again until I bought a Ferrari Dino. I actually didn't start with that. I just bought it as a street car, and I bought that in 80. I would say about 86. Bought the Dino, and then I had a good friend named Barry Russinoff, who was a Ferrari guy, and Barry came to me and he said, we need to do the Mille Miglia. Now bear in mind that the original Mille Miglia was an all-out race in Italy for 1,000 miles, starting in Brescia, going to Rome, and then back to Brescia, and it on two-lane twisty mountain roads, and it was the all-time record was set in 1955 by Sterling Moss and Dennis Jenkinson in a 300 SLR, which he did the 1,000 miles in 10 hours and 7 minutes. That included stops for tires, fuel, and so forth. But an incredible drive. And I, having done it 4 times now in what's known as the retrospective, which is not a race anymore, it's a rally, time, speed, distance rally. But I've done it 4 times, 87, 88, 89, and 90. And I can tell you that I've driven that course 4 times, and you can't do it in 10 hours and 7 minutes. But he did. But I go to, starting in 87, I went to Italy. First car was a Maserati 200 SI. Then in 88 and 89, I did it in a 1900 Alfa Zagato. And then in 90, my wife and I co-drove a Seata SC750, serial number SC001, which had run in the real Mille Miglia real Mille Miglia stopped in 57. And it had run in the real Mille Miglia in about 56 or 57. Really tiny little car. The two of us fitted it nicely. But that was the Italian situation. But I actually didn't start racing again until I think it was the Miami Grand Prix, and I've forgotten the exact year, but I'm going to say it was probably about in the early 90s. One other thing that I did, of course, it led to the racing, was I bought an AC Bristol, which is that Bristol that's sitting right over there. And then in 96, Brian Redmond put together a group of people to go to Nassau. They were going to try to revive Speed Weeks in Nassau, which I had done Speed Week in Nassau back in the early 60s. And it was a wonderful trip. We took the car over about, 50-some cars to Nassau, 4 days of driving at speed with police escorts around New Providence Island. It was terrific. And we had, Sterling Moss was there, Phil Hill was there, and it was a wonderful, wonderful event. But in the early 90s, as I say, I decided they had the race in Miami, and we went down to it. I said, well, it's here. I might as well go downtown and watch it. And as we were approaching the racetrack, I could hear the noise. And I said to myself, this is not going to be good. This is not going to be good. It's going to suck me right back in. And it did. And I bought a Lotus Elan. And we had 2 races in the 2 years. I'm trying to think what years they were. In Freeport, Bahamas. SVRA put those on in Freeport. And I did the first year in the Lotus Elan. And then I bought an MG Midget, 1275 Midget, which it was a Huffaker car, and it was a really little rocket ship. I did the second year at Freeport in the Midget. And I was in, for the week I was there, I was in, I think, 6 races, and I won all 6 of them with the Midget. It was a real great little car. But that was the start of it. And then it went from the Midget, and of course I bought the D-type Jaguar, and I bought that in the early 90s, and it was built for me by Proteus in Manchester, England, and it's a reproduction D-type, long nose, but normally SCCA would not allow reproductions to run, but this car was so exact. It was an exact reproduction. It wasn't just a car made to look like it. It was an exact reproduction. And so they allowed me to run it in SCCA or in SVRA. So it just kind of progressed from there.
Now, how long did you campaign that car?
Probably 12, 13 years.
Okay.
On that one. The Midget, I campaigned, MG Midget, I probably campaigned longer than that, because I continued, when I stopped racing the D, I continued to race the Midget. And
now the D that you have here in your facility.
That's when I'm converting to an XKSS, and it's 95% finished.
Okay. All right. Was there more racing after the D, or was that the swan song?
No, bear in mind that at that particular point, I'm in my mid to late 80s. So I'm saying, there comes a time, although I felt that I could still run competitively with the other cars, you just have to be realistic and say, wait a minute, there's a time when you want to. The problem is that in racing, you have to make instantaneous decisions. Now, as you age, you can retain your memory and so on, but you don't think as quickly. It's like I watch Jeopardy every night, and I can get a fair number of the questions, but I can get most of the final Jeopardies because I've got time to think about it. But
well, when it comes to racing, not that I've raced a lot, but it's a young man's game. I mean, they have no fear. They have no experience to see all the things that could go poorly.
Well, it's not that exactly. I feel that when I was in my early 80s, I was as fast on the racetrack as I ever was.
No kidding.
Yeah, yeah. But then I said, no, it's time. It's time. It's like I stopped flying. We've had a number of airplanes. We've had Cessnas, we've had Pipers, we've had and Navion, I had Moonies, a number of airplanes. And there comes a time when you say, it's time to let that go.
Okay. So do you still follow racing, or has that
Oh
just-
yeah, I'm a real Formula One fan.
Oh, yeah.
I don't watch NASCAR particularly. It's not really interesting to me, but I love Formula One.
Yeah, what's not to love about that? Okay, so are there any other recollections about racing that
Well-
you care to share?
Of course, as I say, the racing in car-related situations. We started doing rallies. The New England 1000 with Rich and Gene Taylor, done that. I've done the California Melee when Martin Zwig was putting it on. So rallies are interesting. You don't. The New England 1000 is an example. When we did it, we were accompanied by the Vermont State Police, and we had a meeting beforehand, and they said, "Now listen, we understand that you people are not taking alcohol when you're doing this. We understand that these are valuable cars. We're going to give you permission to go 20 miles an hour over the speed limit anywhere you want to, but be careful with that." So we did that. That's basically a 3-day affair. Yeah, 3-day basically affair. And one experience that I had, I was coming back to Manchester. I was coming down next to one of the lakes in Vermont, and a D Jaguar came roaring past me, just roaring past me, and very close behind him was a state police car. And we said, "Oh, what's happened here? This is not right." So we went on down about another 5 or 6 miles, and the two cars were pulled off the side of the road. The D-type was off the side of the road, and the police car behind him. And we stopped to say, "Oh, can we be of any assistance?" Turns out in the D-type was the state trooper, and in the police car was the guy that owned the D-type. They had swapped cars. So this was back in in the early 90s, and so things were a little different. No, it was in the late 90s. Things were a little different.
Okay. Okay, let's transition now, and why don't we talk a little bit, since Rocky's not here, why don't we talk a little bit about building your collection? And I know from what we've spoken about before that it wasn't a plan, it just kind of happened.
The way it started was basically after my divorce, and when I started dating Rocky, I bought a condominium in South Miami. And across the street from the condominium was a Lotus Europa sitting in the yard. And it had been sitting there. And I watched it for 6 months. It didn't move, just sat there. And I went over one day and knocked on the front door, and I said, "What are you going to do with that Europa?" And he said, "Well, it belonged to my son, and we're probably going to sell it." I said, "What do you want for it?" So we made a deal. And I bought the Europa. Now, I owned that Europa until about 6 months ago. And I gave it to one of my best friends because I had done probably 90% of the restoration on it, and I just didn't want to continue. I just said, "Don, if you'll take the car and finish the restoration, you can have the car." So I gave it to him. It's here in town, and it's
nice.
beautiful. He's finished it. But that was the first car. Now, bear in mind that I had other cars. I had the D-type at the time, which I'd bought for racing, and I had the 1275 Midget, which I'd been racing. I'd earlier sold the Elan, which I'd raced for about a year and a half. But then it was a slow progression from there. I think I bought another Dino Ferrari. A friend of mine came to me and he said, I know where there's a Dino in Baltimore that only has 1,200 miles on it. And he told me the price, $27,000. And he said, the only problem is it needs a paint job, because the reason it's so low mileage is the man that bought it didn't like the paint job, had it repainted, was still unhappy with that, and he was very wealthy and he put it in a warehouse and forgot about it. So I bought that car and then had it repainted, and it was wonderful. So I kept it until it had 2,990 miles on it, and I sold it. But it was gorgeous. It was like a brand new Dino, brand new. And I had two Dinos at one time, because I had the one that I had originally purchased and then the one that I secondarily bought. And things like the XKE Coupe belonged to a man named John Kane in Miami, an attorney. And a friend of mine said to me one day that maintained the car, he came into my store and said, John wants to sell his car. And I said, how much does he want for it? And he said, he wants $25,000 for it. I said, what? And so I damn near had an accident getting to the bank to get the money to get to John's house to say, I want that car, which I did. But it was, they came about. There are very few cars that I specifically went to buy. There are few. The AC Bristol I found in Hemmings, and I said, oh, I've always loved Bristols, and I bought it in the early 90s. The D-Type I ordered from England and was built for me in Manchester. The E-Type Coupe was, I just told you I went to buy it because it just came for sale. The Porsche 356 Coupe was at Hilton Head. I've been judging at Hilton Head for 15 years for the concourse every year. And the Porsche dealer in Hilton Head had a display at the event, and that Porsche was sitting there. Now this has been probably 8 to 10 years ago. I lose track of time. And I said, why is this car sitting here? He said, well, it belongs to a customer of mine here on Hilton Head who is buying a new Porsche, and he doesn't have room for another car in his garage, so he wants to sell it. And here again, he quoted me a price, and I said, I'll take it. So these things have come about serendipitously. It you never know when they're going to show up.
So when you acquire a car, are the cars, we're all caretakers to cars.
Oh, yes.
When you acquire one, is it with the intent of holding it permanently, or is it just visiting?
I don't have any particular intention. I buy them because I like them. The EMW is an example. We bought it at Hilton Head. It was in the auction. They had a car auction in conjunction with it. And beautiful little car, but it was in the auction, but they pull up on a ramp in the tent for that. It didn't have enough power to pull up onto the ramp. And and Rocky spotted it, and she said, that car is beautiful. I love that car. So I went over and cranked it up, and it would start. It didn't make any rattling sounds. It didn't have smoke out of the exhaust. And I said, I don't care, I'll buy it. So we made a deal to buy it. Now, because of the situation with not having power and not the deal, I got a very good price on the situation. I shipped it back to Stewart, got it into the shop, started looking at it, and I found that it's a 6-cylinder motor, and 2 of the spark plugs had the wires crossed. They put them back on incorrectly, and that's why it had no power. Put the plugs back, and it ran beautifully.
Well, that was very opportune for you.
Each one has a different story. We have a little car over here called an HRG, which is a British car. They made 241 of them, and it stands for Halford, Robbins, and Godfrey, HRG. But my name is Henry, my wife's name is Rochelle, and our last name is Grady. So we're HRG. And so, we searched for that. We found that one out at Fantasy Junction, Bruce Trenery in California. The same place that we got the Alpha, SS, Julia SS. So there's no specific thing. It's not like, a few times I've said, oh, I want one of those, I'll search for one of those. Mostly they just show up.
Okay. Are there brands that particularly appeal to you?
No, basically European. I don't care if they're German or Italian or British. I kind of like the Brit cars. I have more British cars than anything else. We have about 5 Jaguars, and I tend to like the Brit cars. One of the reasons is that each car has a personality that reflects its country. You can tell a German car, it's different. You can tell an Italian car, it's different. You can tell a British car, it's different. And the British cars are what are known as Bitzers. In Germany or in Italy, when the manufacturer decides to build a car, they will engineer everything and then go to the people that supply bits and pieces. In Italy, Morelli or Weber or so on, and they'll lay out the specifications that they want. In Germany, the same thing. They'll lay out the specifications to Bosch or to Ate or Schaefer or so on, the brake people. And the Brits don't do that. The Brits say, we're going to build a car and we need this specification. Now, for the electrical, let's go around to Lucas and say, what do you got in alternators that put out this amount of amperage? And they'll say, oh, we've got this alternator, that'll do. Or they'll go to the gasket makers, to Pan, and say, we're building an engine, will you build us the... So it's Bitzers. The lights, if you look at tail lights on British cars, many different brands share the same tail lights. Many different brands share the same generator, the same carburetors, the SU carburetors. It's a different mindset of how they do it. There's an interesting a record that was made by Peter Ustinov called the Grand Prix of Gibraltar, in which Ustinov does it's all vocal. He does all of the voices. And you have an American team, you have a German team, you have an Italian team, you have a French team, you have a British team, and he does all of them and basically outlines the idiosyncrasies of each nation and how they do things. It's really, really amazing.
All right, so let's talk about your relationship with Rocky. You guys.
Well, I have to morph into that. I got divorced, and I had developed a tire operation in addition to my parts operation in Coral Gables. I became the importer for Semperit tires, a car that was made in Austria. I opened up a separate tire dealership. I had the Honda dealership going, and I had the tire dealership going, and I had the parts dealership going. Well, the parts distributorship going. And I had a fellow named Phil working for me, and I was divorced. As I say, my divorce was very amicable. I had a had a meeting with an attorney for the divorce, a guy named Mitty Adkins, and Mitty tried to start a fight between us, my first wife and I. And we said, wait a minute, we're not mad with each other. We just have different interests. We want to go different directions and so on. At any rate, we went before the judge, and after we had a divorce party, we had all of our friends in for the divorce. And the crazy thing about it is that over the years, she remarried, and whenever she would come to Miami, if she and Ed would come to Miami, they would stay with us. And when I would go to North Carolina, I would stay with them. So there was never any animosity at all. It just was great. But at any rate, Phil worked for me in the tire department, in the tire business. And we were going to go sailing one night, and he was dating a woman named Eleanor who worked in a real estate office. And Phil said, well, I'll get you a date, because I'd been divorced for about 6 months at that particular point. And he was going to bring along one of the secretaries in the real estate office. And at the last minute, she had a couple kids. At the last minute, she couldn't go because one of her kids was sick. So Phil said to Rocky, or to Eleanor, bring another person along from the real estate office. And Eleanor and Rocky were very good friends. So Eleanor said to Rocky, come on, go sailing with us. We're just going to go sailing on a Wednesday night. Rocky was engaged to a man who had gone to Israel, and he wanted her to go to Israel. She didn't want to go. So she was at home, and his name was Richard, and he was going to be back on the following Sunday. We went out on Wednesday night on the sailboat, went down to Soldier's Key. Phil and Eleanor and Rocky and I down to Soldier's Key, and we cooked hot dogs and the typical. We anchored at Soldier's Key. Actually, it was a little pier, so we tied up at the pier at Soldier's Key. And then I talked to her on the phone the next day, and I took her out to dinner Friday night. We went first to the Rusty Pelican over on Key Biscayne, and they couldn't see us for about an hour and a half, so we ended up going to the Shaved-In Dome, which is a really high-class place in Coral Gables, the David Williams Hotel. And Saturday, we dated again, and basically I moved into the condo that I had just bought, and I would say that by Saturday night or Sunday, we were living together.
So things went well.
So it just went just like that. It was like her interests were my interest. I loved her interest in what she talked about, and we just clicked. And that was 48 years ago.
Wow. Now, what was Rocky doing at that point?
Well, she was selling real estate.
Okay.
And she was a really good real estate agent. And as a matter of fact, she still is very good. She has a broker's license, and she still does not actively do it, except she does it for friends. She'll act as the broker agent for real estate that friends buy, and we don't take any money from it, but we just do it.
So, if it's anything like my relationship with my wife, they're not only support, but they help you sort through big decisions that you have to make in your life. How is that played
Well,
out?
what happened was that after when we got married, then of course I was still involved with the marina development, and I left that, and we decided that we would open a jet ski rental operation on Key Largo, which we did, and we ran that for about a year and a half, and we had an accident. We had a redder who had gone out, and basically what had happened, they'd had an accident, but then the real problem was that a young man in a speedboat towing a skier came through the inlet, came through the canal, and they ran into another boat. And the driver was a young college guy, and his friend in the boat, and a dog in the boat. And the two of the people were thrown out of the boat. The driver, they weren't hurt, but they were thrown out of the boat. The dog was still in the boat. The boat was at full throttle and ended up going around Barnes Sound, out in a huge loop, and it came back ashore at our jet ski rental. And it hit the beach, went airborne. We had a little travel trailer that we were spending time in when we would go down there, and it hit the corner of the trailer by about 2 inches. Landed on a Lincoln that was parked there, and the dog was still in the boat. The dog jumped out of the boat and ran away, but we decided at that particular point that we should sell the jet ski operation. Because fortunately, there was no lawsuit involved or anything that happened. But we sold the jet ski operation, and then we were we decided that before we decided, I said, I want to get back in the parts business again. So I called up Bill Arnowitz, who was the owner of Beck Arnowitz, and said, Bill, I don't want to go in competition with you. I just want to be one of your distributors. Great, fine. So we opened up in South Miami an operation called Action Parts, which we became the primary distributor of foreign car parts in Dade County at that particular point. And that we operated together as a team for, well, from, I think we opened that up in, oh gosh, I'm going to say in 78 or along in there. And we operated that until 99. And very successful operation. And we were in an unusual situation. We had no borrowed money. I owned everything in the place. And my philosophy was that I would keep it on the shelf if I sold one a year. Didn't matter how obscure it was, one a year is all I needed. Because I developed a purchasing system and developed a computer system. I hired a man named Jimmy Gensley, who was a programmer, who came to work for me. Now, I'm a single store. I developed a computer system for it with my own in-house programmer. And we went, normally in the car parts business, you make about 26% to 32% gross profit. But I was buying all over the United States and all over the world, searching because of the experiences I'd had with parts before. I knew where to buy stuff and how to buy it at a different price. So I was buying product from probably 15 different suppliers scattered around the United States. And because of that and pricing, I was able to raise the gross profit from 28 to 32% to 42%, which made a huge difference in the situation. Now people say to me, how can you justify having a part on the shelf if you only sell one a year? I said, well, if I take that money and I put it in the bank or on the stock market, how much money am I going to make? But if I sell it one time a year, I make 42%. So that was the deal.
So now, was Rocky working the business with you?
Yes, she ran the office, and I ran the business operation and was involved in, I developed the computer system. I wouldn't program it. I would go to Jimmy and say, Jimmy, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to do, so on. And he would then program it. And Jimmy would invariably say to me, you know how long that's going to take you to do that? And I'd say, it doesn't matter, Jimmy, just go ahead and do it. In about 2 hours, he'd walk into me and say, is this what you want? So that went on until about 99. And we decided, and now incidentally, of course, we had sold the jet ski situation, that was in the past. And we just said, it's time for us to think about something else. So I had a customer, Auto Parts and Machine in Miami, Terry Perry. And Terry and I were good friends, and we went over to investigate selling air conditioner parts, because we didn't sell any air conditioner parts at that time. And Terry was there, and I talked to him and said, you know, I'm thinking about selling it. And so he bought me. He bought the whole business. Now, he didn't really need the parts. He had 6 locations. He didn't need that part. He wanted my computer system. And so that when Jimmy went to his main office at that time, Jimmy Hensler, who was a programmer, and he raised Terry's GP from the 32% to nearly 40% because of the purchasing system that I developed. But so basically that was it. I stayed on for 2 years to make sure the transition worked. And then in 2000, or say 2001, about 2001, we started looking for a place to move to. Because in our opinion, Miami had become an untenable place to live. I loved it.
There's no place in the world I'd rather live than Miami in the 1960s. It was wonderful. But by the late 90s, 2000, it was becoming, I think, an unmanageable city. It was not for us. So we searched the state of Florida for a year. We went to West Coast, East Coast, up to Melbourne, in the middle, and, Mount Dora, Orlando area, and so forth. Came to the conclusion that Martin County was the best place in Florida to live.
Well, gotta cut a piece of that and send it to the Chamber of Commerce.
Well, it was the place. And so we came up here, started coming up here in 2001. Now, we had a house in Coral Gables. Actually, it wasn't in Coral Gables, it was across the street from Coral Gables in South Miami. It was the thing I hated to leave most. It won Florida Architectural House of the Year when the second year that it was built, which was built back in the early 80s. And it was what's known as a pod house. 4 pods, each one of them 27 feet square, with a central pool, and then all connected by an 8-foot wall that went all the way around. And it was wonderful. One pod was living room, dining room, kitchen. Next pod was master bedroom and bath. Next pod was split in two, was 2 bedrooms. And the 4th pod was garage and utility room. It was covered with huge oak trees. Inside the house, that is, each pod was connected to another pod by an overhead walkway, so you didn't have to go to rain if you went from one pod to the other. But the inside the house, there were 12 mature oak trees growing inside the house, inside the
In the
wall.
center space.
Yeah, and it was the best house in the world. Now, bear in mind, we went through Hurricane Andrew in that house, and we had no damage to the house at all. We had a lot of limbs blown out of trees, which took a long time to square away. We got that squared away. But I lost 7 shingles off my roof. I found 5 of them and nailed them back in place. But
So you were retired when you came here?
well, we weren't retired when we were living in that house.
No. When you moved to Martin County?
When we moved up here, we were retired, yeah. And we moved up, and I rented initially about an 1,800 square foot shop on Grand Parkway. And of course, one of the reasons we came up was because of Jim Thomas, who has the huge motorcycle collection. Jim's right around the corner on Grand Parkway. He has 100 motorcycles, mostly British, just beautiful collection. And he has cars too. But they were good friends of ours, and we moved up, and they were urging to come here. And that's how we discovered Martin County, discovered Stewart. So it was in that 1,800 square feet for about 2 years, and then Jim's building, Jim has a 10,000 square foot building, and he was renting out a third of it. He wasn't using all of it. And so I said, Jim, I'm going to move, and he was right behind us where we were. We were in a building right next door to him. So he eventually, his tenant left, and so we moved into that building, which was 3,300 square feet, and shared that with him. And we were there for a couple of years, several years. And then it's really funny. I went into him when we found this building. I went into his office. I said, Jim, I got good news and I got bad news. I said, the bad news is that we're moving out. The good news is we're moving out. Because he said, thank God, I need the space and I never would ask you to leave. So that was a perfect deal.
Every good man has a good woman that's supporting him, helping guide him, sometimes directing him.
So why don't you just tell me a little bit about the nature of your relationship, what works, what are challenges?
Right from the start, it was obvious to me that Henry was the right guy for me. I don't know if he told you that I had to propose to him.
He did not mention that.
Oh, okay. That's how sure I was that I had found the right man. As you know, Henry is a 1 in a million, and it was the man of my dreams. I could not let him go. The interesting thing about our relationship is we are totally opposites, and opposites attract. Henry's 21 years older than me. We're different religions. I was a Yankee, he was a Southerner. We had very different backgrounds, but somehow it all worked, and we were able to become one and the same. When I say that, we had absolutely the same ideas about finances, and as most people know, that's the number one reason that people get divorced, is arguments over money, arguments over children. We don't have any children. I was not able to have children. And actually, I think although it was hard at the time, I think it worked out well for us because we were able to concentrate on the two of us and our business and the dogs that we had and the cars that we had. I always considered the dogs and the cars to be family members. People think it's weird that I name the cars, but it's part of having something that you
Well,
love.
who doesn't do that? I've got Klaus and Sig.
Well, you can't really come in here and say, well, let's take the Jaguar out. Which one? Give me a name.
So when you met him, what jumped out at you?
The sailboat.
Yeah, I fell in love with the sailboat that very night. And it was very romantic. It was an absolutely perfect evening on Biscayne Bay. And there were gentle breezes, full moon. Henry put the sails up, turned off the engine, and it was the first time in my life that I had been moving in the water without noise.
So it's just serene.
Yes. My father was a big boater, and my daddy was also a car guy. So some people can say, well, no wonder you fell for Henry, the father figure. Maybe that had something to do with it. My father was in the petroleum business, always had a cool car. Back in those days, we called them Sunday drivers. Car in the garage that you took out on Sundays, put the whole family in and took a ride. Today, I don't think people use that term too much, but back then it was popular. Dad was big into sport fishing, so we always had boats with big gas or later diesel engines. I hated the smell, I hated the noise, and the sailboat was absolutely perfect for me.
So Henry, so now this good-looking woman is brought to you, boards the boat. What was your reaction? I mean, did you know right away, or was it, oh, look, it's just another night, another date? It turned into
No, I knew pretty well, hey, this is a cool chick. and I want to get to know her better. So we did.
Yep, and then he found a perfect anchorage. Now, we had our friends aboard. Did he tell you that?
He did.
Yes,
And he told me about cooking hot dogs too.
yes. Did he tell you that our friends took off in the dinghy and left us alone on the boat?
He did not say that.
Ooh, yes. He left out the best part. And we're sitting in the cockpit and looking at the stars, and of course, Henry knows all the stars, so he's impressing me with naming all the constellations and pointing here and pointing there, and every now and then one of his hands would get a little too close to my body, but that, it was an accident. And then he did my favorite move of all that guys used to do back in the old days. One of these stretches.
The big stretch.
A big stretch where, you know, the arm ends up over the shoulder. So, I mean, that was the beginning of going in for the first kiss. And I remember that first kiss.
So now, you were engaged, if I recall the story
I
correctly.
was. And I told Richard not to leave town for 2 weeks. I said, what am I going to do for 2 weeks? Obviously, I knew once I met Henry that Richard was not the right one for me. Richard was what my mother always told me I needed. But boy,
So-
did I
so-
prove her wrong.
Henry probably saved a very traumatic experience.
I bet he did. It-
Oh, okay. So you're on the boat. Everybody's in love. Henry's doing the big stretch.
yeah.
Your folks are your company's off in the dink, and so the night's over. Calls you the next morning.
He did. And the sale was on a Wednesday night, so he called me on Thursday and asked me out for a real date on Friday night. Did you tell him about the real date?
Not a lot.
It's such an important part of the story. Because in the last 47 years, it's the only meal that ever started with escargot and ended with cherries jubilee.
No. Okay.
He was trying to impress me, and it worked. He took me to the fanciest French restaurant in Coral Gables, and the Chez Vendôme. First and last time he ever spent that
Well,
amount of money.
he told us. He said that you had gone to another restaurant, you had trouble getting in or something
Yeah.
like that, and you decided to up the ante.
Yes, and it worked. It worked. So that was Friday night. I don't know if I should say this on camera, but hey, I'm an honest woman. We started living together Saturday night, and we've never been apart.
He mentioned that.
Okay. Hey, when you know it's right, why wait?
Yeah.
I had my whole life written in this big book in the sky. And in the big book, it said, you have to graduate college with honors, you have to get a good job, you have to be married by the time you're 25. And clock was ticking. I needed to get married before I was 25. So it was probably 10 months after we had been dating. We weren't fully living together because I still had my little apartment, but we spent most evenings together, and then I would go home in the morning, call my mother from my apartment, and say, can't talk long, I have to get ready for work. And that went on for 10 months. I sat Henry down one evening after we both got home from work, and I said, now is the make or break moment. I need to get married, and either you're going to marry me or I have to move on, because I mean, look at the time. I got to find somebody else to plan the whole thing. I don't have a whole lot of time left. And he looked at me and said, well, can I think about it? And I said, well, if you have to, yeah, go ahead and think about it. And he said, after 3 or 4 seconds, okay, let's get married. It wasn't like, I love you, I can't live without you. It was, but that's the way Henry is. You know, he's very decisive, and a man of few words when it's not necessary. So that evening we decided to get married, and it was a very simple affair. We didn't make a big deal about it because it in my mind wasn't necessary. We had already been together for close to a year by the time we got married. And to me, our life had already started together.
Oh, good. So, you get married. Now, Henry, you had started the Miami business at that point, correct?
No.
Henry was president of Beck Arnley Corporation, Southeastern Division.
Yeah. Okay.
And he was still in the phase where he was unhappy because he had to answer to New York. And even though he was president, everything was committees. Mm-hmm. And Henry's used to doing things his way. So it was shortly after that when we made the decision together that if he could get out of his contract, we could start over and build another auto parts empire.
So, were you on a consulting agreement or something? Or?
Well, originally, I just
He had
retired.
a non-compete clause.
Yeah, non-compete, and as I say, that lasted about a year as we did the other things. We did the jet ski operation, and then for many months we were just flying here and there and playing and sailing, and we were retired. And then I said, I want to go back in the parts business. And that's when I called Bill Arnowitz and said, Bill, I want to be a distributor. I don't want to compete with you. I just want to buy from you. He said, great, we'll give you all the help we can.
Right. So you were actively involved in the businesses.
Very.
Right. I was in real estate and mortgage financing. I have a degree in education, but I realized pretty quickly that teaching children and not being out in the business world was not going to help me find a husband. So I got my real estate license, went on to become a real estate broker, and then when we started dating, I got my mortgage broker's license so I could work Monday through Friday and not have to do open houses and showing houses on the weekends. And when the opportunity came up for me to help Henry get the business started. Now that's the key words. Help him get the business started. 24 years later, I was still saying, can I go home now? I don't think either of us realized how well we would work together and what a blessing it is to have a business partner that you don't have to worry about.
And I know it's probably oversaid, but when your best friend is your spouse and your business partner is your spouse, that's a win.
It's a winner.
Henry had his areas of responsibility that basically had to do with inventory, buying of parts, sourcing the parts, and my end, it was all about the money. Controlling the money, making sure the bills were paid, making sure the payroll was done.
So you haven't lost that job?
No. But how nice to know that you don't have to be looking over each other's shoulders and worrying. I never had to look over Henry's shoulder and say, did you remember to do that? Did you do that part right? And he never had to look over mine. And a lot of people found it incredible that we could work together all day and go home and spend the evening together.
My wife used to work with me, and it was the same thing. How can you be together all day long? Why wouldn't I?
We always took 2 cars. I usually left the house first, and then I would get home first so I could deal with the dogs and get dinner started.
Okay, you guys, I'm going to kind of gloss over a little bit here, but ever any challenges, or has it been just good sailing the whole way? Or?
Well, there were a few little bumps, personally. I mean, obviously, men and women don't think exactly alike.
I wouldn't know, but I've heard.
You've heard that, right. And you have to resolve some of those conflicts, but no major challenges, no major challenges at all.
So let's jump into Henry's racing, specifically his European racing. And I know that you were involved with that. You co-drove at least one of the races. Tell me a little bit more about that.
It was the ultimate lifetime experience, being able to say that you've done the Mille Miglia in Italy once is a great achievement, but to be able to say that we got accepted 4 times with cars that the Italians, because of course the Italians are picking everything, and unless you have a one-off Ferrari, don't be an American and think you're going to enter a Ferrari and get accepted. You have to come up with cars that are cars that the Italians haven't seen, or they don't have other people that are applying with that particular car. And that was the big challenge, being able to come up with the right cars. And of course Henry was able to do that part of it. And then with some connections in the United States, which helped, we were able to get the acceptance of 4 times. It's a remarkable feeling of being in an open car, and the streets of people, they just open up as the car is driving. People are gathered around you,
Well,
and then they spread out. This is at the beginning, and as you're coming in each day at the evening, you're surrounded by people. And I learned the first time I was in the car that the Italians are so loving that they actually want to touch you. You're almost like a saint or a movie star to them. And I remember the first day leaving Brescia, and we were driving slow because the crowds were partying, and people were hitting my helmet because they needed to touch me, and that was like the part that stuck out the most, hitting my helmet. Well, I didn't like getting hit in the head, so I put my hand out so they could give me like a tap on my hand as we went by, and that was working for about 30 seconds. And then one gentleman took my hand and didn't let go. And Henry's driving, and my hand was going like this. Finally, he let go. Then the rest of the trip, I sat. like this.
And it was really funny because as you go through all the little towns, they give you everything. You get fruit, you get drinks, they hand you stuff, they give you stuff. And initially she said, no, we're not eating any of that stuff. You never know what's happening. I said, this is Italy. It's a whole different
She's
ballgame.
an American. You can't trust anybody.
I grew up where Halloween, if you got an apple, you weren't allowed to eat it because it could have a razor blade in it. Of course, Mom would throw the apples away.
No.
So, yeah, it amazed me. I said to Henry, well, stop wherever you can so we can get rid of this stuff. He said, no, I'm hungry, let's eat it. And then I realized that everything was fine to eat. The experience in Italy, to me, was one of the highlights of our life together. I made a decision early on that I didn't want to race the cars. I didn't think I'm a very competitive person, but I didn't think I'd be good at it because
let me add something here. She decided she wanted to go racing. I said, okay, well, we'll get you a midget or something. Oh no, I want a 914.6.
Well, yeah, that was part of it.
I said, no, you're not starting racing in a 914.6.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was going to tell the story about being very competitive, but I needed to pick the car that I wanted, not the car that Henry wanted to race. It was kind of like the same thing when I was getting my private pilot's license. I don't know if Henry told you that owning our own series of airplanes, I felt that it was my responsibility to be able to take over the controls if anything happened to Henry, because lots of times we had other people in the plane with us. So I decided to go to ground school. And you can give me a book on just about any topic and say, study this book and here's an exam with 30 questions and you have to pass the written exam. No problem. Pass ground school with flying colors. And then the second part of flying is you have to log in hours. So I was real excited. I called Henry and I said, call the FBO, fixed base operator, tell him to fuel up the plane. I'm going for a ride tomorrow. And on the phone,
Solo?
he said, what are you kidding? You think you're going to use our plane as a training plane? And I said, yeah, of course. Why am I going to fly what I called rent-a-wreck? I'm going to rent a wrecked plane that I have no idea who's been maintaining it, when I have a perfectly good plane that I want to learn to fly on. It was the same thing with racing. Henry had his own ideas on what I should race, just like he had his own ideas on what I should be flying. Well, I decided that I didn't want to fly a 150 or a 152, so I never formally got my license. Although Henry did give me the controls enough that I felt that in an emergency with help on the radio that I could get us to safety.
I think that was really a great idea.
Well, she would be flying along, and I would say, take up a, 92-degree heading or whatever it was and so on. And I would be studying what I'm doing or so on, and I'd look up and we'd be 30 degrees off course. And I'd say, what are you doing? She's following a cloud.
Well, it's kind of like in the sailboat. In the sailboat, I loved to be at the helm. Loved it. But in the sailboat, because our whole speed was 6-7 knots, I could do that. I don't like looking at the instruments. I like looking at the horizon. So I would find something and I would focus in it and then I would sail towards it. It worked on the sailboat. It didn't work so well up in the
Well, the time frame is a little different.
But yeah, I wasn't instrument trained, and when I would get antsy on long flights when Henry was piloting, even though I knew he was flying instruments, he would always tell me that we were VIR, visual,
VFR.
VFI, visual flight rules. So I could spend my time looking out the cockpit and looking for other planes. So that was one of the other reasons I didn't like looking down. I liked focusing out because I was always looking for other planes while I was in control.
Okay.
So
All right.
Okay, so let's, again, let's kind of wind this down a little bit. So in retirement, Henry and you build this collection. I know that you go to shows often. And from what I hear, it's an environment that you're quite comfortable in.
indeed,
So, what shows are the most meaningful to you?
I like shows that are connected to an organization that's usually a 501c3. I like shows that are raising money for causes that I think are important. We're kind of past the stage in our life where we go to a parking lot show, at the Denny's restaurant. I'm not doing those kinds of shows anymore. I like shows that you get invited to that are a limited number. That way I usually get more time to talk to the people that are coming through. That happened this weekend at McKee Gardens. There were only 40 cars, so people were really interested in talking to the car owners. If you go to a show like Amelia Island that we've done probably 8 or 9 times, we pretty much can get invited to the Amelia Island whenever we want to go. And whenever we got a car that was new to the collection, we would call Bill Warner and say, Bill, we've got something you haven't seen, and he'd say, absolutely, bring it in.
Well, now you guys have done Pebble too.
No, haven't.
Not the show.
Okay.
I feel that there's enough going on the East Coast.
Okay, so I know that both of you are actively involved with the Elliott, and you've got a long history, and some would argue that you set the direction of certain aspects of what they do out there. So why don't you tell us about your relationship?
When we started looking for a new place to live and found Martin County, it was really the Elliott Museum that nailed it for me.
No kidding.
I
Was
grew up-
that back in the old building?
It was
or
the
no?
old building.
Old building.
But I grew up in Philadelphia, the suburbs of Philadelphia. And fortunately, I had a mother that was big on culture. And we had the Franklin Institute, the Natural Museum of History, the Art Museum in Philadelphia, the one where Rocky ran up the steps.
Mm-hmm.
So
The other Rocky.
the other Rocky, I was Rocky before Sylvester. But to me, culture was important. And of course, we had culture in Miami. But we were looking for a smaller place to live and had no idea at all that we could find a museum of the quality of the Elliott. And I say quality because even in the old building, it had an ambiance that immediately won my heart. The old garages with the cars, it smelled in the garages. It had that wonderful smell of old cars.
Smell of
and
oil,
old-
yeah.
But I love that smell. I don't want it in this building. I don't mind it in other people's buildings. But back then, it was a separate building from the museum itself. I knew right then and there that if Martin County turned out to be the place, that I would get involved. as it turned out, we then found a lot of other culture in Martin County, including the beautiful Lyric Theater and the Barn Theater. I got involved initially with the Maritime Museum, which unfortunately did not make it, but they had a location on Canner, and we just gave up, and actually the Maritime Museum ended up getting incorporated into the Elliott Museum. A lot of people don't know that.
Well, the boats, right?
Boats, right?
Yeah.
That's maritime part.
So were the Evergreen, that collection was at the Maritime Museum before?
Yes.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, that's how we ended up with the Edmund collection.
Okay.
So we picked and chose what we wanted to keep it at the museum. So back in the old museum, when things were in the talking stages about tearing it down and rebuilding a new modern building on the same footprint, I just started hanging out there. I started hanging out in the car museum and volunteering, and I started getting noticed. So it didn't take too long before I came up with the idea of doing classics at the beach. That was my little baby that I started, and it's been very successful. It's different now that we have the big building. We actually had more room in the original building for the car shows because the footprint of the building was so small. But the Elliott is really, we call it a hidden gem on the Treasure Coast. We're not so hidden anymore because of the fantastic job that the staff and our CEO, Rob Steele, is doing. I've been on the board now for 8 years. I'm an officer with the Elliott Museum, and we're both involved in any events that we can help with. We've done, besides the car show, we've done events that I named Octane and Opulence, and we've done several of those shows. Those are inside the museum with cars. I will set a theme, whether it's British cars or Italian cars or cars of the world. We'll stage the cars.
Race cars.
Race cars, and then we'll have a cocktail party where car people come and are able to kick tires and talk about cars. Car people are amazing people. You just get them together in a room. You don't even have to know who they are. You just start talking to them and you always have something.
Yeah, they're
common.
capable of entertaining themselves, no doubt about it.
Yes. And you give them a few glasses of wine and everybody's happy. And everybody has stories. And I love hearing other people's stories. I mean, I try to stay quiet and listen to other people's stories.
No, you don't try to stay quiet.
All right, she said to turn your mic off.
So we're hands-on with the Elliott whenever we can, and we're also big supporters financially. We believe that an institution of that sort should certainly live on in the community, and we're making decisions right now on how we're going to execute that for the future.
Well, I know that you're appreciated there. You know, I've had conversations with multiple people, and your name constantly comes up.
I think having a name Rocky helps people remember me.
Okay, so we have got an awful lot of material, and so I guess I'm just going to throw it out. Final thoughts. Is there something that you think that we haven't touched on that really?
Yeah, I have a final thought.
Okay, go ahead.
And I say this quite often when I'm doing a car show, and sometimes you have a limited number of cars you can accept. And sometimes other members want to accept a car because it's a wow car. And then you'll see a guy that puts in an application. He's got one car. He's been working on this car for 3 years in his garage at night when he gets home from work. It's the love of his life. The car's finally done, and he wants to show it. He will always get on my list. I don't believe in having to have a large collection like this in order to enjoy the sport or the hobby of car collecting.
So Rocky, you're telling me there's still a chance, huh?
There's still a chance. You have one car. You did a good job on it. You're enthusiastic. You love it. You want to show it off. You want to talk to people. You're my kind of person.
Okay. Okay. I have two final things. The first of which is regrets, and I've spoken to Henry about this. It's been a long, full, rewarding journey for you. I asked Henry, what's left undone? Henry, what's left undone?
Not much. We've touched most of the bases.
Oh, no, you got to tell me about the guitar.
Well, that's my only regret, that I never learned to play the guitar. Other than that, I don't have any regrets.
That's good. It's
Yeah,
enough.
I don't sing, dance, or play a musical instrument, so that's probably a regret. But, as far as Henry and myself, I guess the only regret is I asked him, please, just start going backwards in years, and I'll continue to go up. And leave it at 75,
There you
and
go.
then we'll stop there.
80.
But so far that hasn't worked. But I feel that we still have a lot of ground to cover, and we still get phone calls from people that have cars that they think we might be interested in, and we're still listening. We're probably not done.
I told Henry, I think he's got another 100,000 left in him.
If we're talking dollars, hopefully it's more
No.
than that.
I was speaking miles. Okay, so as I said, I think we've got a lot of great stuff here. What a wonderful story. I just have one last thing. I consider it a personal favor. Give your bride a kiss.
friend said to them, why don't you go talk to John Tajero? He has built a car that maybe you could do. So basically, AC bought a license from John Tajero to build this car. Looked like this car. And what they agreed to pay him was 5 pounds per car for the first 100 cars. That was what he got out of that. So they built the prototype and so on. But bear in mind that this car looks like a Ferrari Barchetta. This little thing that you see right here, this little thing, is on a Barchetta. And the Barchetta does not have the swoop down that you have on the fender here. It's a straight line that comes back. So the AC looks very much like a Barchetta, but it's much prettier. The AC.
Okay, tell us about the Jaguar here,
E-Type.
the E-Type.
The E-Type, the first was in 1961. It was introduced at the Geneva Car Show in 1961. And Enzo Ferrari attended the show. And when he saw this car, he said, that's the most beautiful car in the world. Now, the strange thing about it is that the Ferrari GTO, if you look at it carefully, is shaped very much like that car. They're very similar, very similar. But that, in Ferrari's mind, was the prettiest car in the world. And in my mind, it's almost the prettiest car in the world.
And how long have you had this car?
I bought this car in, I would say, what year did we buy the E-Type? I think we bought it in 90.
We've had it about 22 years.
Yeah, we bought it in the late 90s. That we bought it.
And was it ready to go, or did you have to?
Yes, it was.
Really? Okay.
The car was originally restored in Montana by a man named Jerry Carlson, and he did a rotisserie restoration on the car. Did absolutely everything. We have all the pictures originally from it, and it was a wreck. It was awful. Jerry did a magnificent job of restoration. And as you see it now, I have done nothing to it in all those years. It's just the paint, everything is as he did it. It's really wonderful.
Okay, and the Roadster?
That's Bob Lodine's.
Okay.
That's Bob's car.
Okay, well, tell us about the Alpha.
Alphas are wonderful, wonderful cars. I've had Juliettas, I've had Sprints, we've had later Juliettas and so on. Wonderful cars, but she has always wanted another Alpha. And so I spotted this in Hemmings Magazine. And it was for sale at Fantasy Junction, California. And I called on it, and strangely enough, we made a deal. Because to my eye, this is almost the prettiest car in the world. As a matter of fact, we had it last weekend up at McKee Gardens show. And we must have had hundreds of people that came through the show.
Now,
I would say probably 150 of them said to me, that's the prettiest car in the show.
now, Rocky, this is very much your baby as well, correct?
Yeah.
Why don't you come over here? Why don't you
Come here.
chat with us about it?
And you're forgetting the most important Alpha,
What's that?
the one that we did the Million in.
Oh, the 1900?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Mr.
1900.
Gatto.
I got it, yeah.
Did Henry talk about the Million?
He did, he did.
No, not California. He did California, but Italy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Rocky, tell us what this car means to you.
Cars, of course, are works of art, and nothing depicts that better than Sophia. I named her Sophia after Sophia Loren, and it has to do with her curvaceous body. There is not a flat panel anywhere on this car. Every single panel has a curve to it. We believe it's the only car that you can say that about. even the cars from Italy that are designed so beautifully. When you see this car, you know right away that it's an Italian car. It has a certain ambiance and flair to it that you just can't get with American cars and even with some of the British cars. It was interesting at McKee Gardens where there were several thousand people and there were several $1 million plus cars there, including supercars and hypercars. People were gravitating towards her. With cars these days, it has nothing to do with money. It's not that this is an inexpensive car, but when you're talking about hypercars, which are $1 million plus cars, it's interesting to see that people still like the older cars that really speak to them.
All right, so Henry, tell us about this Jaguar.
Well, this is XK120 drop head coupe. It's a Normale, not an SE. I love this car. It's pleasant to drive. And one of the beauties is that the rear window zips out so that you can drive this car in the summertime, and the way the air flows through it, it's like it's air conditioned. It's just a wonderful car to drive. It feels good. It's not very powerful. It's got about 160 horsepower with this 3.4 motor. But it's just pleasant to drive. It's pleasant.
Now, you bought this car in town, correct?
Yes, we bought it here in town.
So Rocky's version of Dove is totally different. His name is Dove because the paint is Dove gray. And
Now, was that a factory color?
yes,
Was it?
it was, but you don't see it too often. It was a special order from the dealer. But I usually double check, even on the XKE. I like to make sure that the colors are original to the cars, and it was. The beautiful thing about Dove is the fender skirts. You never need air conditioning in a car like this. It's very comfortable. It's our go-to car in the middle of the summer. I think Dove will be one of the cars that stays with us till the very end. He's super reliable and can serve a lot of different functions because of his elegance. We've actually had him to very formal affairs where he sat out front.
And what year is he, Rocky? What year is he?
This is a 1953.
Okay, I'm sorry, Rocky, go ahead.
No, I don't have these open right now. There's a latch, but that brings additional air in through the bottom. That also helps.
2 years ago, a friend walked into the office and told me I just put a deposit on a new Corvette. I had seen pictures of them, but I had never seen one. And I said, "Oh, yeah, those are really pretty cars and really engineering and development. I think it was good." I said, "What is that car? $150,000, $160,000?" He said, "No, $60,000." I said, "What?" He said, $60,000. I picked up the phone and I called her. I said, "Get down here. We're going to go buy a Corvette today." She came right down. Within an hour, we were at the Chevrolet dealers, and we put in our order. I think we were 44 on the list of cars that were going to be out there. We thought we were going to get a 21. Turns out, because of the strike that they had in the COVID situation, they did not. We're not able to produce the car. It
took us 14 or 15 months to get the car from the day we ordered it. They honored the price that they had originally quoted us, and in my opinion, this is the best, most car in the world that you can buy for the money. There's nothing else like it.
Okay.
And bear in mind when we talk about money, what a car is worth. They're worth what somebody is willing to pay for this, because most of them can be built from scratch for less than what they less than they sell for. But it's this car is unique. The lines on this car are very European, look like a modern Ferrari, and it's got just under 500 horsepower. What more could you want? I mean, it's a rocket ship.
So, Rocky, you don't like this car, do you?
So, of course, there's always a Rocky story. And when Henry said, get down here, we're going to go get a Corvette, I knew right away that I wasn't going to order a red one or a white one, because those were the two most popular colors, and all the ads were showing red Corvettes. Well, I'm a leader, I'm not a follower. I'm not going to order what everybody else is ordering. And it turns out I nailed it. I started with the red leather, because whenever I have the option of red leather, that's what I go for first. Started with the red leather, had to go to the red calipers. Then to me, it was a no-brainer picking out the shadow gray metallic. The car looks blue right now, it literally changes colors. But one of the things that I love about the shadow gray metallic is, in Corvette talk, we call this the boomerang. And on the white and the red cars, it stands out very prominently when you're looking at the car, almost like it was an afterthought. Like, gee, we need something else, let's stick a boomerang on it. Well, it's now been redesigned for 2022. I think a lot of people were saying it was a little awkward. But in this car, it just blends in, so it
Okay.
doesn't stand out.